The Roman Empire was one of the most powerful and far-reaching empires in world history. Yet this magnificent empire was built entirely upon the foundation of slavery. Rome's victories, its territorial expansion, and its prosperity rose on the backs of millions of enslaved men and women bound in chains. One of those slaves was a man named Spartacus, and he would go on to ignite one of the greatest slave revolts the Roman Empire had ever faced. Before he was enslaved, Spartacus had served as a Thracian soldier in the Roman army. At one point, Rome demanded that he turn his weapon against his own people. He refused to obey his commander. He fled, was captured, and was reduced to slavery. He was then sold to a ruthless man named Lentulus Batiatus, who operated a gladiatorial training school in Capua. From the moment Spartacus entered the school, it was clear to everyone that he was different. He fought with remarkable skill during training, impressing both fellow gladiators and their instructors. In a short time, he rose to a position of leadership among the slaves. His reputation spread throughout Capua and eventually reached Rome itself. Batiatus, whose fame rested on the success of his gladiators, was soon invited to send fighters to Rome for a public combat event. He would select his best men and have them fight before the Roman crowds. For Spartacus and the others, this meant certain death. In the Roman games, there was no mercy for defeated gladiators. For Spartacus, who had long been contemplating escape, this was the final breaking point. Together with his closest companions, Crixus, Oenomaus, Castus, and Gannicus, he began to plan a breakout. Their goal was simple: to shatter their chains before ever stepping into the Roman arena. On a summer night in 73 BC, the plan was put into action. Originally, nearly 200 gladiators were expected to join the revolt. But the plan had been exposed, and the guards were on alert. Even so, around 70 gladiators remained committed. They possessed nothing more than kitchen knives, wooden clubs, and stones. One by one, the guards were overpowered. The gladiators seized the weapons storage, armed themselves with swords, and broke out beyond the walls of Capua. The escape had succeeded, and the rebellion had officially begun. To avoid being easily hunted down, Spartacus and his companions fled to the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. Located in southern Italy, the mountain was surrounded by olive groves and steep rocky terrain, naturally defensible, almost like a fortress. At first, they numbered only 70. But as word of the revolt spread through Capua and the surrounding countryside, enslaved people began fleeing their masters and climbing the mountain in waves. Before long, the rebels numbered in the thousands. At first, Roman officials did not take the reports seriously. News from a gladiator school in Capua sounded like nothing more than a minor disturbance. In the Senate, it was dismissed as a simple slave uprising, something that would last 3 days, perhaps 5 at most. As a result, the man assigned to deal with it had no real military experience, a nobleman named Gaius Claudius Glaber. He was given a force of 3,000 men. But these were not seasoned soldiers. They were poorly trained troops, some of them mere volunteers. Glaber's mission was straightforward. He was to surround Spartacus and his followers on Mount Vesuvius, cut off their escape, starve them into submission, and force their surrender. Mount Vesuvius was high and steep. Glaber positioned his forces to control what he believed was the only path down. But Spartacus and his men did the unthinkable. They circled behind Glaber's camp and launched a sudden, unexpected assault. Panic erupted in the Roman ranks. Caught completely unprepared, Glaber's army collapsed before it could even understand what was happening. As swords tore through Roman armor, the gladiators' dream of freedom grew stronger with every blow. The destruction of Glaber's force was a humiliation for Rome. What had begun as a gladiator escape was no longer a simple slave revolt. It had become a direct challenge to Roman authority itself. After the victory at Mount Vesuvius became known, enslaved people across Rome began breaking their chains and joining Spartacus's ranks. With each passing day, Spartacus's army grew larger. First, the numbers reached 5,000, then 10,000, then 30,000. But most of these people had never held a sword in their lives. They were ordinary slaves who knew nothing of war. Together with his capable commander Crixus, Spartacus established a military structure. Looting was forbidden. Discipline was imposed upon the slave army. Rome was no longer facing a minor uprising. This had become a mass movement spreading across Italy. The Senate could not afford a second humiliation. A new army was raised and sent against the rebels under the command of two senior consuls, Publius Varinius and Lucius Cicinius. When Spartacus learned of their advance, he divided his forces into smaller units and set ambushes for the Roman troops. Cicinius's army was completely annihilated in a sudden nighttime assault near their camp. Soon afterward, Varinius's forces were trapped and destroyed along a narrow forest road. Panic began to take hold in the Senate. Rome's countryside was burning, roads were cut, trade was disrupted. Spartacus and his army captured city after city, Beneventum, Nola, Nuceria, Metapontum, and Thurii among them. The enslaved populations of these cities joined him. Within a year, the rebel army had grown to nearly 80,000 people, almost 1/4 the size of Rome's own military. Despite commanding such immense power, Spartacus never intended to conquer Rome. His goal was to cross the Alps, return to his homeland of Thrace, and live in freedom. But not everyone around him shared that vision. Some were still driven by plunder. Others sought revenge against Rome itself. One of those who disagreed with Spartacus was his longtime companion, the Gallic warrior Crixus. Crixus wanted to march into the heart of the empire, seize the city, and force Rome to its knees. The arguments dragged on. No consensus was reached. In the end, the army split in two. Spartacus led the main force, around 50,000 men, northward. Crixus remained in the south with roughly 30,000 fighters. For the Roman Senate, this division was an opportunity they could not ignore. They acted immediately. A force of 40,000 experienced and battle-hardened Roman soldiers was assembled and placed under the command of the renowned politician and general Lucius Gellius. The army marched south. The two sides met near Mount Gargano. Crixus and his men were exhausted after long marches. Even so, the slave army launched the first attack. Each charge was met like a collision with a solid wall. Again and again, they were driven back. Against disciplined Roman professionals, Crixus's forces began to melt away. When Crixus himself was killed, the slave army, now leaderless, was completely destroyed. After his victory, Gellius turned north and advanced against Spartacus. At the same time, another Roman army under the command of Clodianus moved north to block Spartacus's path to the Alps. Rome's strategy was clear: trap the rebels between two armies and annihilate them. But Spartacus struck first. Near Pistoia, in a valley of the Apennine Mountains, he ambushed Clodianus's army and caught it in a deadly trap. After a fierce and brutal battle, the Roman force was largely wiped out. Clodianus and the surviving soldiers were forced to flee. Following this victory, Spartacus marched against Gellius and met him in Umbria. Once again, Spartacus and his army emerged victorious, and once again, Gellius fled the battlefield, just as Clodianus had before him. The two defeated generals gathered what remained of their troops and made one final attempt to stop Spartacus. Near Piceno, they were defeated yet again. By now, the Senate's patience was gone. Both generals were removed from command. In the eyes of the Senate, there was only one man capable of erasing this disgrace: Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, a political mastermind, and a general remembered for his ruthlessness. A new army of 50,000 men was immediately raised and placed under Crassus's command. Marching north, Crassus positioned his forces south of the Alps. Spartacus attempted to break through Crassus's lines, but failed. In the battle that followed, he lost 6,000 men and was forced to retreat southward. By this point, his army was exhausted. It was then that Spartacus turned his attention to Sicily. The island was Rome's primary grain supplier and had already witnessed multiple slave uprisings in the past. If he could reach Sicily, he could ignite another rebellion, perhaps even plunge Rome into a civil war lasting years. To do this, he struck a deal with pirates to transport his forces across the strait. The army established a camp at Rhegium in Calabria and waited, but the pirates took the gold and disappeared. By the time Spartacus realized he had been betrayed, it was too late. He was trapped in southern Italy, confined to a narrow strip of land. Crassus moved swiftly. He constructed an extraordinary defensive line to encircle Spartacus's forces, stretching 60 kilometers across the narrowest point of the Italian peninsula, fortified with trenches and walls. The Roman navy arrived as well, sealing off any escape by sea. Spartacus and his army were now isolated, cut off by land and by water. As days passed, hunger set in, and morale began to collapse. Spartacus and his army managed to break through the defensive line with a sudden night assault. As they fled northward, Crassus pursued them relentlessly. At the same time, reinforcements were closing in. The famous Roman general Pompey was marching with his army. So was Lucullus, the consul of Macedonia. Spartacus turned toward Brundisium, planning to cross to the opposite shore. But when they arrived, they discovered that Lucullus had already landed. Their escape route was cut off. As a last resort, Spartacus sent a letter to Crassus, seeking a negotiated settlement. Crassus refused. With no other option left, Spartacus led his army north toward the region of Campania. But once again, their path was blocked, this time by Pompey and his forces. The year was 71 BC. The place, near the Silarus River. Spartacus and Crassus faced each other one final time. The slave army numbered around 50,000. Their morale was weakened, their supplies exhausted, but they were still free. Spartacus stepped before his men and delivered a final speech. "Today, we will leave this place either alive as men born free, or we will die as free warriors. Rome enslaved us, but we will decide our own fate." With those words, Spartacus and his followers charged the Roman lines. The clash was horrific. Every assault by the slave army was met, as if crashing into an unbreakable wall. As casualties mounted, Spartacus drew his sword and fought his way toward Crassus's command post. He cut down 2 senior officers, but he never reached Crassus. When his guards fell, Roman soldiers surrounded him. He fought with extraordinary courage, but he did not survive. With his death, the slave army quickly disintegrated. In the battle, approximately 50,000 slaves were killed. Roman losses numbered around 12,000. To serve as a warning, General Crassus ordered the bodies of 6,000 captured rebels to be crucified along the road leading to Rome. Rome had prevailed once again, yet the rebellion Spartacus ignited left scars that could not easily be erased. The fact that Spartacus's body was never found, despite months of searching, only deepened the legend. Some believed he had survived the battle and vanished without a trace. Rome tried to erase his name, but Spartacus was remembered differently. Before Spartacus, gladiators were merely warriors living under Roman domination. When the opportunity arose, they broke their chains and expanded their reach. Under Spartacus's leadership, they defeated rival forces one by one and became one of the greatest threats Rome had ever faced. Over time, they fought not just for survival, but for freedom, and in doing so, carved a path of resistance for future generations. Spartacus proved that even those bound in chains could challenge the mightiest empire on earth. His story became a symbol of defiance against oppression. Though he fell on the battlefield, his legacy endured. History remembers him not as a slave, but as a man who rose in the name of freedom. Spartacus, the gladiator who defied Rome.